Welcome. We got another Old Britannia, and it's awesome to know that Old Britannia is not just about Britannia, about Britain. I know this is like 7 videos later that I'm saying that, but when I first saw the channel, I thought it was just going to be about Great Britain, like literally, just like, or even like the United Kingdom or something like that. Definitely isn't. It's amazing. So this is Austria again. This is called the Perils of Neutrality. It's about Austria and the Crimean War, probably about like the difficult like alliances and situations that it would occur through themselves and Russia and their surrounding allies. So let's jump into it. Roger here, by the way.
Austrian Empire. The position of the Austrian Empire in the Crimean War remains one of the most interesting tales of neutrality from the 19th century. Torn between self-interest and loyalty, Vienna opted for an uncomfortable compromise that, whilst not totally inept, helped set the stage for the great disasters over the following decade. This video then aims to offer a short analysis of the period. In 1853, disputes, or more correctly, misunderstandings exacerbated by intransigence on both sides over the fate of the
I'm sorry, what? Intransigence. See, I'm not terribly dumb, but sometimes words be said that I don't know. And most people will be like, cool. Me? Nah, I gotta look that up. It's refusal to change one's views. Okay. Stubbornness is also a good word here. Cool. So let's back up with that context.
understandings exacerbated by intransigence on both sides over the fate of the ailing Ottoman Empire saw a European conflict between great powers break out for the first time since 1815. It was an unwelcome war for the Habsburgs, and Vienna was caught hopelessly unprepared. Schwarzenberg, Austria's last great statesman, had died the previous
John Tyler's brother, like I said before.
year. The young emperor, Franz Joseph, had taken over the duties of prime minister himself, and relied on the advice of his cabinet, diplomats and soldiers, each of which had a different view and squabbled relentlessly about it. Whilst in the background, he really wanted to be spending time with his new bride, Elizabeth, rather than discussing the Eastern question with his 56-year-old foreign minister. Small wonder then Vienna struggled to maintain a coherent policy throughout. The basic facts of the war once it had been declared were that Russia wished to pursue what we might describe as a revolutionary policy in the Balkans, that is to say, a reorganisation of the region to St. Petersburg's liking. Western war aims varied wildly, but were agreed on stopping this expansion. Austria was caught in the middle of these conflicting powers. On the one hand, Russia had since 1815 been a traditional ally, and had saved Habsburg rule in Hungary when it helped quell the revolutions of 1848.
Yep.
On the other hand, Russian expansionism threatened to upend the old order that St. Petersburg had supposedly fought to save in 1849.
Yeah, and like you're basically surrounded in this in regard right here. And not to say necessarily this would be Russian territory, I don't think. I think also Petersburg was looking as more of a sphere of influence of alliance or maybe like puppet states, if anything, here. Because I don't know, this is a tall order. I guess they would have to like really just destroy the Ottomans for them to be able to take this territory.
Generally, the criticism of Austrian policy in this time period is that she should have either declared against Russia before or early in the war and won the favour of the West, or alternatively supported Nicholas I loyally and so at least maintained the Russian alliance. Both courses are easily stated, neither were easy to follow in practice. Part of the problem for Austria as tensions grew was that whichever side she chose, she was bound to destabilise the European order, with which the fate of the Habsburgs was inextricably linked. The Ottoman Empire kept at bay forces of nationalism in the Balkans and offered Austria stability on her southern flank. If St. Petersburg was to have its way, this stability would be replaced with Russian-dominated nation-states, anathema to a multi-ethnic great power.
Look at that map. I wish I had a more zoomed in version of that. You got like the Croats, you got the Hungarians, Romanians, Slavs, Germans. Don't know what that yellow. Let me know what that is. Like that hint of lime yellow between the red and the more the teal at the top, and on the left, that's Italians, right?
In the lead up to the war, Nicholas did not help matters by confusing Franz Joseph. In one breath he talked about a religious crusade against the Muslim Turks, but in the next made it clear his real aim was the Straits. The young emperor did his best.
That is true. That was his aim.
But short of outright telling Nicholas he distrusted his motives, there was little Vienna could say but continue arguing the collapse of the Ottomans was likely to result in chaos that could spread to monarchies everywhere. Nicholas would have none of it. He was convinced, partly by his paternal-like friendship on a personal level with Franz Joseph, partly because of the loyalty he felt he was owed, that Austria would ultimately support him. It's also true that by basing their objections to Russian policy around fears of
official Austrian objections, let's read this. Ottoman collapse could spark revolutionary wave. Which, you know, this is past the 1848 revolution, so that's always, especially on the eastern side of Europe, it's always like a conversation. And then dangerous for European monarchy order, which some of these nations are no longer in that. Like I said, it's Austria. There's a lot of monarchies in Europe at this time, but I think France and currently, I can't remember if France is in a. I can't remember where France is yet. If they're in the Republic or if it's Emperor Napoleon III at the time. It might be Emperor Napoleon actually, but definitely the United Kingdom have kind of has more of a liberal democracy at this point. Obviously,
revolutionary uprisings, rather than the real issue of Russian domination of the Balkans.
So the official versus actual. Okay, so official's their face, and then actual's their meanings. Ottoman collapse would lead to Russian domination. True. Dangerous for Austrian power in the Balkans. Very true. So basically what we said already.
Vienna may have inadvertently implied to Nicholas that so long as he promised to quell any revolution, he could count on Austrian support. Yet the Tsar did himself no favours. In July, as the prospects of a negotiated settlement receded further, Russia moved troops into the Danubian principalities. These states were nominally Ottoman-controlled, but under Russian influence they posed a serious danger to Austria. Not only did it double the common frontier, occupation gave Nicholas control over the lower Danube, Austria's main trading link with the
economy. So it's overlooked all the time when we talk about wars, but yeah, very true. A river. Ooh.
The world. The Habsburgs' primary goal was always to prevent war, but Buol stressed they could not tolerate Russia's claim to exclusive supremacy over the Ottoman Empire, nor would they allow Nicholas to entrench himself on the lower Danube. Yet, openly supporting Turkey and opposing Russia was also dangerous. In the first place, there could be no doubt Franz Joseph did feel obliged to Nicholas for rescuing his throne less than half a decade earlier. More practically, siding openly with the West would draw Russia's ire, and if Austria joined the war, Galicia, not Crimea, would be the front line, and the Habsburgs plunged immediately into a life-or-death struggle. Buol's strategy was thus to try and browbeat the Turks into giving at least nominal satisfaction to Russian demands, which might allow Nicholas to back down with his prestige intact.
But then you could face war against the Ottomans.
This strategy was hampered by bickering among the Austrian establishment, most importantly between Buol and Austrian internuncio to the Turks, Bruck. A rabid Anglophobe,
Internuncio, is that like ambassador?
Bruck did not dread war in the way Buol did, and saw it as a potential opportunity for breaking what he supposed to be British supremacy at the port, instead replacing it with Austro-Russian control. He came up with convoluted schemes for partitioning the Balkans with Russia, which Nicholas would undoubtedly have endorsed, but which Buol ignored. Instead, he decided the Turks should accept a joint European proposal.
And that's just saying, like, we're going to steamroll them. You know, this is just hypothetically speaking at this point.
The famed Vienna Note drawn up by the four great powers. At this point, Buol seemed to have secured a great triumph. After meeting Franz Joseph at Olmutz, Nicholas accepted the note as confirming Russia's old treaty rights in the Ottoman Empire, narrowly interpreted, abandoning his expansionist policy. But Britain and France, worried by Nesselrode's earlier violent interpretation of the Vienna Note, were no longer willing to accept Nicholas's bona fides. Really, the British in particular should have leapt at the opportunity Vienna had gifted them. Instead, with the arrival of Anglo-French steamers at Constantinople, the Turks issued the Russians with an ultimatum to evacuate the principalities. Thus, in early October 1853, Austria could only watch as war finally broke out.
Dang, so yeah, like literally are stuck in the middle.
In the initial stages of the conflict, Buol continued working for peace above everything, hoping a new four-power mediation effort would be successful. He refused to bow to Western demands, but still had to go some way to meeting British conditions, and thus the 5th of December note handed to the Porte made little headway. With the war now a fact, Buol set about constructing a new policy. He signalled to Russia that if she committed to non-revolutionary, strictly limited war aims that would not upset the Austrian position in the Balkans or elsewhere, Vienna would remain neutral. If not, he would have to support the West, at least diplomatically. Of particular concern to Buol were the Danubian principalities, which remained vital to Austrian security. As Paul Schroeder says, Russia, by transforming her occupation of the principalities into virtual annexation, appealing to Orthodox believers everywhere for a crusade against the infidel, and preparing to cross the Danube, showed how little her promises were to be trusted in a crisis. In January, Orlov was sent to Vienna to persuade Austria to pledge neutrality, but Nicholas refused to pay the Austrian price, a promise not to cross the Danube, not to raise the Balkan peoples in revolt, and not to take any Ottoman territory even if Russia won the war.
Because they definitely, this is their aim, right? This is Russia's aim. It's got to be.
Unanimously, the Austrian Conference of Ministers rejected neutrality on Russia's terms, and Buol set out in February and March to create a unified front of the West, Austria and Prussia, to force Russia away from the Danube. Buol presented his case for openly aligning with the West to compel Russia to evacuate the principalities. The Emperor, however, strongly influenced by Hesse, the Austrian Chief of Staff, initially rejected Buol's arguments on the ground that the risks of war were too great. "Do you realise," Franz Joseph asked his foreign minister, "that here in Vienna there are only two men who are not pro-Russian, you and I?" "Just so, your majesty," replied Buol, "but they make a very strong party, your majesty and his minister." It is true that the Western powers were hoping to use the
That's crazy though, that their odds are just so in favor of Russia. Besides them two, if that's true, that's insane.
Principalities as bait to bring Austria in.
But these Danube territories, they're so far east to Vienna. Austria is trying to create, it's because of the geography itself, it's just a difficult conversation. Do you want to bottleneck the huge Russian forces through the Ottoman territory? Or do you allow passage? And if you allow passage, oh, it's just it's so difficult. It's just, that's the biggest thing here is this, it creates a bottleneck, and the bottleneck can go 2x if you allow them to go through that territories. And with Russia's large forces, you do not want a bottleneck. So, and like I said, this is all hypothetically.
Into the fight, but the danger posed by an overstretched Russian army was exaggerated. Finally, on June the 3rd, Buol got his way and Russia was told to evacuate the principalities or face conflict with entering Austrian troops, which, after grumbling, St. Petersburg agreed to. Buol had achieved a major political
We need to go back to like the Crimean War. Like, why did this even start?
Victory, the occupation of the principalities without war. What Austria's intentions with the principalities were has aroused a good deal of debate from historians.
Wait, say that one more time.
The occupation of the principalities without war. What Austria's intentions with the principalities were has aroused a good deal of debate from historians. Traditionally, it was believed Buol intended the occupation to be put on a more permanent basis, eventually allowing for annexation, and for certain some figures in the Austrian government thought this way, but Schroeder has made a convincing case that official Austrian policy always remained conservative in regards to the principalities, that the type of protectorate Vienna sought was essentially defensive and European in nature.
Okay, so I see it as it's theirs, but they don't want to they don't want it to be theirs. It's a hard way to say it, but it's theirs in a sphere of influence, but it's not theirs, so they don't really have the responsibility to it as as to the degree if they were to annex it completely. Because originally I thought these territories were already annexed, but again, apparently not.
Mainly concerned with the principalities not becoming a staging ground for Russian advances into the Balkans or a safe haven for revolutionary dissidents, and that in calling for a European mandate for herself, Austria was genuinely hoping to gain European participation in the Protectorate. Buol seems to have believed that this would lay the groundwork for a lasting settlement to the Eastern question. Yet the position he had achieved for Austria, Russia cut out of the Balkans, Austrian control of practically the entire navigable length of the Danube, and the Habsburgs' place to be the sick man's sole heir, could only now be consolidated by full alliance with the Western powers. The case for war grew almost too overwhelming when the Allies finally landed in Crimea and news arrived of their victory at the Alma, along with a false report of Sevastopol having fallen. But when the city was confirmed to have survived, the war party lost momentum once again. It may sound inhuman, but the longer they go on killing each other in the Crimea, the more we may count on having peace, Franz Joseph confessed.
The more they, I guess because that's the front.
Buol arranged a treaty of alliance with the West on the 2nd of December 1854, but the Emperor had no intention of actually acting upon it, though he did continue the policy of armed neutrality, mobilising over 450,000 men, which came close to bankrupting the empire. When Sevastopol did finally fall in 1855, the war was virtually over. Nicholas I had died a few months before this crowning humiliation.
Yeah, so that's an easy reason. I forget that happened. So that happens, and regime change often creates change of diplomacy.
A collapse his son attributed to anguish over Austria's betrayal. Thus, the Habsburgs found themselves friendless and alone at the Congress of Paris in 1856, having to instead listen to the Piedmontese Prime Minister Cavour, who
Yeah, there's Cavour on the far left. We talked about him.
Had no such qualms about plunging his country into the conflict, denounced them, whilst even Austrian influence over the principalities was nullified, instead being replaced with a guarantee of the great powers, though this, at least initially, was not too far from Vienna's original aim. Austrian foreign policy in the Crimean War is traditionally seen as one of the great blunders of the 19th century, making the classic mistake of failing to choose a side and as such annoying all. The West continued to see her as an unreliable oppressor of Italians and Magyars, Russia as an ungrateful traitor. Yet it's worth considering the problems with either of these alternatives. A Western policy has been advocated by historians like A.J.P. Taylor. Geopolitically, it was the natural alignment. Austria could have wrung a guarantee of her position in Italy out of France and Britain, been given a blank check in the Principalities, and permanently neutered Russia's position in the Balkans. Yet at the same time, allying with the increasingly liberal and nationalistic inclined Western powers
Kind of puts you on a slippery slope, doesn't it?
would have made Franz Joseph's absolutism impossible in the long term,
Yeah.
and if Austria was forced to liberalise along Western lines, the loss of her Italian provinces was a foregone conclusion. Even that was only if a still shaky Habsburg monarchy first survived a life or death struggle in Galicia, though avoiding this fight in 1854 was a large part of the reason Austria had to engage in it under far less favourable circumstances 60 years later.
Ooh.
Should then Austria have followed a course advocated by contemporaries like Bruck and repaid the debt owed to Russia from 1849 by carving up the Balkans jointly? Though it was perhaps the natural ideological alignment, Bruck's arguments, then as now, are fundamentally naive. He could hardly have been unaware that Russia had for months been urging this course on Austria for obvious reasons. It would have encouraged the Russian advance, made Austria a partner in crime, threatened to involve Austria in a war with Turkey, England and France, and incidentally raised the spectre of revolution in Italy and Hungary. Bruck did not see that, while Russia and Austria could be friends everywhere else, in the East they were rivals. He showed no understanding of how dangerous a nationalist, religious and Slav.
By the way, I want to look at this. Most of this analysis of Bruck comes from Schroeder's article, Bruck versus Buell, Dispute of Austrian Eastern Policy. Okay, so it's just a source.
Slavophile hubris would be aroused within Russia by the good beating he hoped Russia would administer to the Turks. His proposal of an Austro-Russian condominium over Turkey paid no attention to the immense advantages which race, language, religion and historic traditions would give to Russia in this partnership. On this score, Franz Joseph at 24 saw more
Only 24 years old. That's crazy.
clearly than Brooke. In reality then, there were no good options for Austria. The line taken, though clumsily executed, carried the Habsburg Empire through the war intact and did not make inevitable the loss of her position in Italy and Germany. Perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough.
I always do this. Cinema. Absolute cinema. Absolute cinema. Just like the absolute monarchy that Franz Joseph is portraying here. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a you know, stuck between a wall and a hard place. You got the western side, which really has the power in this case, like with between France and Britain, with the latter being more. But then you have Russia, a vast territory that's on your doorstep. You're gonna have to deal with them in the future. And then you have the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, that can never be overlooked when it comes to how weak or strong they are. The Crimean Peninsula obviously being the place where these battles are taking place, it's called the Crimean War. They didn't call it the Crimean War when they started it, obviously. So, was it Galicia or Silesia? One of the two. That area, yeah, if that was the staging grounds for Russian interventionism, it would have been bloody, and it could have actually led to a very different world that we live in today, just because of that, because of Vienna's tiptoeing around this issue. I think that they bought themselves time and made the powers, they kind of like sat in their hands, and then the powers kind of went about their day. Of course, they did move troops here just in case, but it was actually quite, the patience of Austria here was very mature, especially for a 24-year-old in power, to be able to see the forest for the trees. It's very, very enlightening to see that, although it won't be that way entirely throughout Franz Joseph's emperorship. But really good job there. I would say really good job there. Kind of, you know, there's probably, you could have got some riches here or there, but you kind of stay patient. You could also look at it like they got lucky because of their position, but hey, it is what it is. I thank you guys so much for being here. Leave me some video suggestions down below. Comment if you have a comment. Like this video. I appreciate you. Peace out and bye-bye.